When I have asked people in Europe and in Asia, how long do you think it will take for us to regain the trust of what used to be our most trusted allies? The answers are somewhere between 20 years and never. That is all Donald Trump. Is the Republican Party fighting for working families and thinking about lowering their costs and thinking about making their lives easier?
You experience more trauma than most people do before the age of 18.
My mother was a widow at a very young age. She was 39 when my father passed away, and he was 39 when he passed away. We were 7, 11, and 12, and my mother was an alcoholic. She was struggling with this disease. She passed away when I was 17 and when she was 49. Those experiences, impacted me.
I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to be in your city. I'm excited to chat with you.
Great to have you here, really. And I really mean it, like having you here, and especially coming to one of the great foodie towns and with great restaurants, and this one in particular. American food, that's what you get here at Erie Cafe, and frankly, at a whole bunch of great restaurants here. So
yeah,
we got to make sure you order a steak and, get a full plate.
So this is called Lunch with Jamie. We're not having lunch. We are at Erie Cafe, which I'm excited to be here at. But if you were taking me on the Chicago food tour, where would our food tour go?
Well, I want to just skip all the way to the drinks because if you come to Chicago, I always say you got to have a shot of Malort.
Right.
Which is, really just to prove that you're tough enough to be a Chicagoan. Yep. And so, but beyond a shot of Malort, we have some of the great American food. And of course, some of the best restaurants for steak and fish and other things like that. But also, 77 neighborhoods of Chicago. And we literally are like the United Nations, right? You could, Caribbean food, Ukrainian food, Polish food, every kind of Asian. And so I guess I'd send you to all the American restaurants and at least pick one out for you. And then of course, you can't help but go to a Wiener Circle for a hot dog. And then there's, deep dish pizza. So
got it. I mean, first of all, I'm so excited to be in Chicago. I love this city. Lunch with Jamie usually takes place at my house, at my house, at home office. So to be out in the location adds so much to it. I know Chicago is known as the second city. However, I don't want to get in a fight here as we start out this conversation. My understanding is that was partially due to its population, to second to New York. LA is now got a larger population than Chicago, so we may be the second city.
We don't really refer to ourselves as much as the second city. We have Second City, the performance art, of course, exactly. But we just think we're the best city in the country.
Okay.
And it's a great
city, not the Windy City.
It is the and many people don't know. Did you know that the Windy City has nothing to do with the wind?
No idea.
Yeah, the reason it's called the Windy City is the Chicago Tribune published an article way back when, referring to it as the Windy City because of the politicians being so windy. But anyway, we're it's a great city, and what makes it great, honestly, and this is not hyperbole, I've lived in other places in the country, just when I was younger, and I can say genuinely we've got the nicest, kindest, decent, more so than almost anywhere else in the country. In fact, more so than anywhere else in the country. But I don't want to insult anybody else, but I got to say the Midwestern hospitality, even in a big city like Chicago, you can feel it.
Right, I got it. I'm a fan of a lot of cities. I'm not gonna. I think that everybody in them. I think in our entire country is so amazing with the hospitality, and we just saw that the World Cup, right? We saw that shown very clearly. You guys here as well, and everywhere, Kansas City to Boston to LA to New York. We showed our hospitality. So it's interesting. You are you finished your second term. Up for re-election for your third term. You're governor of one of the most important and influential states in our country, but you're still not as known nationally, which I guess in some ways makes sense, right? I mean, that's one of the interesting things about America, right? There's, the why do we know the governors of Illinois and California and New York and all these places? I think more now than ever, governors have become a critical role. But I wanted to start this conversation just learning a little bit about you and a little about you personally and some fun stuff before we get into the more serious stuff. So you're from Chicago.
Actually, I was born in California, oddly. My parents, both Chicagoans, grandparents, Chicagoans, great grandfather emigrated from Ukraine to Chicago. But my parents started a business long, long ago in California. And so they moved out there, and I was actually born at Stanford Hospital in Northern California.
Yeah.
And ended up here because, frankly, the rest of my family is here. Both my parents passed away. I'd mentioned this to you. And after college, I went to work on Capitol Hill, and then I went to law school. And I had to choose where I wanted to go to law school. I applied. I got into Northwestern Law School here in Chicago, and it's where my whole family is, my uncles, my grandfather, my cousins. So I moved here to Chicago, and I love it here. People used to joke about, when I was in school as a kid that I sounded like I had a Chicago accent because I grew up in a home with two Chicagoans. Yeah. And so, it was natural for me to move to Chicago. It felt like home.
Well, as somebody who favorite city of the world is LA, and because of that, its favorite state is California, I'm going to take you and adopt you as a Californian.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I know the West wants you, but
likewise, we want you here.
Thank you.
You're an honorary Chicagoan.
So as you just talked about, you experience a lot of just more trauma than most people do before the age of 18. You lost your father at a very young age, and then about 10 years later, lost your mother. I can't fathom that as somebody who had my parents up until much later in life. Can you walk me through a bit of that time for you? I know you were very young when you lost your father, but that obviously in many ways shapes the kind of the foundation of who you are.
Sure. And most of us really are shaped in those earliest years of our lives, right? How you react to the world, how you interact with people is defined in many ways by what your very earliest experiences were. And it's one of the reasons that for many, many years I've been involved in early childhood education, early childhood development, because taking kids who live in traumatic circumstances and, communities have been left out and left behind with parents who are challenged, and giving them, the right kind of start has been meaningful to me and partly instructed by and informed by my own experience. So I think I was very fortunate. I mean, there's no doubt, even though I lost my father at a very young age, we had resources. My mother was a widow at a very young age. She was 39 when my father passed away, and he was 39 when he passed away. We were 7, 11, and 12, and my brother and sister and I. And my mother was an alcoholic, so it was she had additional challenges in addition to being the mother of 3 young children and a widow, single mother. She was struggling with this disease. So that was kind of the environment that we had when I was from 7 to 17, was helping my mother deal with her problems and she trying to get help for her alcoholism. And I will say, as you know, those experiences really shape you. The challenges in your life in many ways are the things that shape you most. And so that was, part of how I was shaped as a young kid. She passed away when I was 17 and when she was 49. And of her alcoholism, she never really overcame it. She was in a car accident. It was not her driving, but it was clearly a result of her drinking. And, so I think that those experiences just from those ages, impacted me. And a lot of today, when I think about kids who go through traumatic experiences, I was incredibly fortunate because we had resources. I had family who really kind of took us in and took care of us. And again, I wasn't even a majority age at the time. A lot of people don't have any of that. They don't have the resources and they can't get help for their parents who are struggling. They need a little bit of help. And so I think about that, and it's informed, I think, a bit of my own sense of how to interact with people. The idea that, a lot of people just need a little bit of empathy and kindness in their lives to help lift them up and stabilize them. And it's what I've tried to do in government. So those are some experiences. I, went off to college and then worked on Capitol Hill and worked in campaigns when I was young, and then decided I wanted to go to law school and came to law school here in Illinois in Northwestern University, and I've loved it. I met my wife on Capitol Hill, and she moved here to Chicago, so we've been here ever since.
Thank you for sharing that. You experienced early on that you had a father who was very successful in business, starting a motel out in Los Angeles and turning that into what we now know today is the Hyatt hotel chain. Although he passed away not that long after starting it, about 10 to 13 years, I think. But by the time he died, there was 26 of them, and built this amazing business. But so you had these resources, but all the resources in the world didn't help keep you from being an orphan at 17.
But again, I would just say that having role models. My mother, even though she was an alcoholic, she was also an activist for LGBTQ rights and for reproductive rights in the 60s and 70s. Think about how hard that was. And civil rights. And we were stuffing envelopes for candidates when I was young, sitting at the dining room table. And so I think, I think about her, I think about the success my father as an entrepreneur had, building from one motel to 13 motels, and then, finally, putting it all into one hotel, and then it becoming successful and building more. And all of that is kind of a series of experiences, for me anyway, about role models in your life and how important that is. I was young, but I remember a lot about those experiences, and they've impacted me, and it's why I became an entrepreneur later and went into business.
Yeah. You obviously had a firsthand experience to addiction, which is something that almost everybody in our country has either first or second degree of experience with. Yet our country does such a horrific job for handling it. I saw a great movie that was at Sundance this year called Union County, that's about to come out, and it looks at drug court in rural Ohio. And it's an amazing movie, all using real people, except for a few actors, and deals with the opioid crisis primarily. But I'm curious, as someone who dealt so firsthand and had so much trauma from it, what do you think is America getting wrong about, the addiction, the stigma related to it, and how they're ultimately handling it by criminalizing it, not criminalizing it? That's a big topic of discussion. So I'm curious what your takes on it.
So you use the word stigma. I think it's exactly the right word to start with, because one of the reasons that we haven't over so many years addressed both addiction and mental health challenges is there's so much stigma around it. And as you know, people that have mental health challenges often are self-medicating, and that's how they end up being an addict. And so I think that's the beginning of the problem. The problem is people aren't willing to share their own experiences about going through either their own mental health or addiction problems or the people around them. And the result of that, when you're feeling like there's a stigma, you don't want anybody to know, is that guess what? You're not going to get somebody help. You have a friend or a family member who has an addiction problem. They're embarrassed to deal with it. Maybe not you, but someone is around them is embarrassed to have a relative like that, and so that's the beginning of the problem. Then that leads to bad public policy around it, because if people aren't seeking help, then you're not building enough capacity to provide help for people. So those are all things I think that at least when I think about what my role is in public life, that I think about my mother, and I think about, again, people who don't have those resources, and therefore, what is it that we need to be doing? So first is I've been very open and public about the challenges that I think my mother was having, and I mean, we're not spending a lot of time on it, but just, the kids who go through that are dealing with their own trauma. And so we need to address all of those things, because that trauma is mental health related. I created, for example, a chief behavioral health officer for the state of Illinois, and we tried to take all the resources around mental health and dealing with people's addictions and take an approach to it like we need to provide this just like we do physical, what people refer to sometimes as physical health care. This is health care. So that's kind of the problem we have in this country, in my view, is that in too many places and too often people are unwilling to talk about it, and they're unwilling to share the experiences of it, and therefore people feel alone when they've got the challenges.
Yeah, 100%. I just want to, we have a problem conversing in general in society, and we talk about the loneliness epidemic and things, but sharing what's going on with you is such a challenging part of our society. People never want to talk about the issues that are going on. When someone says, how are you doing? Almost everybody always says, oh, fine, I'm fine. Yeah. If anybody ever opened the door, it would just help other people tremendously. And,
That's right. And I think reaching out and helping somebody that just needs a little bit of a hand up, and a recognition that like, you're going to be okay. We're going to get you help. There is help available. I think that's a big part of how you overcome the challenges that we have in this country, but we're way behind, frankly. I mean, we have so much ground to make up to deal with this problem. And as you've seen out of COVID and other circumstances, the mental health of our teenagers has declined. We need so much help for parents. Indeed, we here in Illinois, we created a law that means that when you enter school each year, you get essentially a mental health, behavioral health exam. Now, your parents can opt you out of it, but the idea is, so many parents don't even know about mental health or behavioral. They just don't understand it. And so having a professional to evaluate your kids, maybe your child is struggling with something, but you don't really know what it is. It'd be very helpful if you could know, and also know that there's some resource you could go seek out to help your son or daughter. And so that, I think, is to me, it's, we've got ground to make up, but we're trying to do it here in Illinois.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's just that communication factor, right? There's so many, just being able to talk to each other, talk to a parent, talk to a teacher, talk to a friend. It's really, it's an epidemic in some ways, right?
Yeah. And your physician, let's say, lots of people don't have a physician or healthcare, so that's another issue we've got in this country. But even many people think about rural areas and ex-urban areas, maybe, and even in the cities, right? There are doctors who don't know anything about mental health or behavioral health, and so they're not helping you. You go talk to them about a problem that you might have, and they don't know how to deal with it, and they don't know anybody who knows how to deal with it, and so you don't get help as a result. So like I said, I mean, there's a lot of ground we've got to cover.
There's a conversation whenever you talk about JB Pritzker, you talk about, everybody always has to talk about wealth. It comes up, which is part of who you are. You've had success. You've had success as yourself personally and through your family. But at the same time, those resources, didn't stop a lot of this trauma that we talked about. However, one of the things I think is really interesting is that, and I'm curious of the responsibility you feel with your success financially, and has that, there's this sort of class warfare going on in our country. There's a lot of villainization of, people, this billionaire class. But you've chosen to give back as a big part of your professional life, choosing to run for governor. There are a lot of other things you could have done. Do you feel part of that? Do you feel that's really, in some ways, that's what some of your success has led to? It's given you the opportunity to spend your days focused on giving back.
I feel very fortunate because I know there are people who might want to do public service and can't afford to do it because it doesn't pay well, and because it takes time away that you might otherwise need for something else in your life. Maybe you've got a sick parent or some other challenge. I certainly, it's been beneficial. There's no doubt about it. A lot of what you're describing is, the kind of divide that people feel about wealth in our country is because we frankly have some really bad examples of wealthy people who get all the news. And these are people who couldn't give a darn about other people and who don't give back. And You know, I would say first among the people, you know, persons that people know are the president of the United States today, Donald Trump. But then it's like, think about the inauguration where the kind of, you know, the leaders in the tech world were just sitting right there, including Elon Musk, who then went on to, you know, put a chainsaw over his head and talk about, you know, cutting government in ways that really have hurt a lot of people in the United States and around the world. And those examples for people, unfortunately, you know, burn in. You feel like, you know, God, these wealthy people are awful. And you know, I like to remind people that, you know, that it's about your values. It's not about, you know, it's like, what do you do with the resources that you have, and what are you do? Who are you as a person? And those values really matter. You can have somebody who's middle class or poor, who's has bad values, but or also you could have people who are wealthy, middle class, or poor who are the best people you've ever met, right? I mean, who are genuinely good people and reaching out and helping. Maybe they don't even have resources, but they're there for you. You know, they'll lift you up when you're down, that kind of thing. And so you know, that I think about that because I know that people started. I remember, you know, when I first ran for governor, there were people saying, well, gee whiz, we had a billionaire governor, Republican governor of Illinois, who had done a terrible job for the state. And we had a billionaire president, Donald Trump, who was doing a terrible job for the country and taking people's rights away. And so here comes, you know, a billionaire businessman who's a Democrat and a progressive Democrat who's, you know, wanting to be governor. And the people were like, wait a minute, do we really want one of those? And so, you know, I have felt some of that, you know, the attitude that people have. And I think it's just over time demonstrating to people who you are. And I think that, you know, what's the, you know, the expression, you know, when people show you who they are, believe them. Right. I think that unfortunately that's true about, you know, everybody, but take Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And, you know, that's the terrible example. And I hope that in my life anyway, and, you know, for my own children, for my family, but also for the state of Illinois, that I demonstrate the kind of values that people would want in their leaders.
Right. Yeah. So you know, listen, you've shown by the work you've done and the policies you enacted that you're somebody who cares about all people, and the people of Illinois are very lucky to have that. And I don't think that I understand the villainization of wealth, and I think that's because we're seeing this income inequality like we haven't seen in a very long time in our society. That gets me to the Democratic Party today. There's obviously a sort of the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, are getting more and more of a voice. Still a very small voice, but they're making inroads. And there was a poll recently talking about socialism in our country, and that especially between 18 and 34 now prefer socialism to capitalism. This was just done by a poll by CNBC or Gallup. What is, in your opinion, or what's the role that the DSA has, the Democratic Party today?
I don't think DSA, when you say a role, you know, I think people run as Democrats and they have their background and what their beliefs are and run as Democrats. And I would just say that, you know, when you look at some of the big names of people who would say they're DSAers and they're running, you know, the things they're running about, if they win, are typically things that are quite appealing to people in a moment when you've got a president who's literally taking food out of people's mouths and taking away their health care, and people can't afford to pay their electric bill or their rent. And you have somebody standing in front of you and saying, I'm going to make it easier for you, right? I'm going to help lower your electric bills, or I'm going to, you know, deal with the high cost of groceries. Because put any label you want on that, but that sounds pretty darned attractive to somebody who's struggling, right? And right now, people in the middle class, working class families, as well as the most vulnerable, are suffering. So that's kind of the way I think about it. I mean, I'm not a member of the DSA, and you know, and there are things that I disagree with. Well, lots of things within the Democratic Party, people with different views than I have on varieties of issues, right? But I think, I like to think back on when Zoran Mamdani won his election in New York City, which lots of people were surprised that he won. But, the same night that he won, Mikey Sherrill won the governorship in New Jersey, and Abigail Spanberger won the governorship of Virginia. And if you looked at the two of them, you would say those are kind of, center-left. I don't know if you'd say they're moderates, but, they're center-left liberal. And Mamdani, you wouldn't say that about. But you know what they ran on? The same things. Like literally lowering your electricity costs and things like that. So that's the way I think about DSA. I mean, they're not going to win if they're not running on the things that really matter to people. And I think we Democrats, what Democrats writ large share in common, and I'm sure there are people who would disagree with this characterization, but I think, and one of the reasons I became a Democrat is because we are the party of working families. We're the ones who stand up and lift people up who need a little bit of help, the most vulnerable, the middle class and working families. That's been our DNA as Democrats. We're the party that created Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. These are vital programs for people to survive during the course of their lives who just need a little help. What about the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act? These are all things that are fundamentally democratic ideas, and that's what lots of people rally around. There are lots of other things, but just taking those 5 things, we should be, we should encourage people who are going to stand up for those things and stand up for the middle class and the working class to run on our behalf. So I don't, I know there's lots of other, you can pick an issue and say, well, gee, I don't like that person, and their label is a DSA. I don't like what that person stands for on some other thing. But again, if they get elected, standing up and fighting to make your life easier, it's hard to begrudge the voters to have somebody doing that for them.
But I guess the question is from the Democratic Socialist program, as they call it, there are certain things that are included in there, right? Which is abolish the Senate Electoral College, to defund police budgets annually towards zero, to rid us of prisons, social ownership of democratic control of utilities and key industries. Those policies are just, to me, are counter to what it means to be an American, to what our society works towards capitalism, which is what we've been set up on since the founding of our nation. So how does that fit inside the Democratic Party?
Well, all I would argue, and I said this a little earlier, is there's not any person I don't think that I agree with in politics more than about 80%, maybe 85%, and that some of the things you said are that's not something I would ever advocate for. But once again, let me ask you, is the Republican Party fighting for working families and thinking about lowering their costs and thinking about making their lives easier? I mean, we're the party that put the child tax credit in here in Illinois and, nationally, Joe Biden. And then it was the Republican Party that took away those tax credits. So I'm just one example.
Right,
yeah. I mean, there are plenty of people that when I go into the voting booth and I look down the list, and I think, I don't like the 3 things that guy stands for, but the 7 other things I like. But, and then I look at the Republican, and I say, well, I agree with maybe 1 of the 10 things. And so, those are your choices. And so that's all I would say. Listen, I'm somebody who believes that if you're fighting for people to lift them up, make their lives easier, give them an opportunity to get ahead, that's the right thing to do.
Right, yeah. You've talked a lot about, what being a Democrat, different values you stand for, and that what the party was founded on. I think one of the biggest challenges the Democrats are having today is nobody really understands what they stand for and what the message is.
Right.
And so I guess my question to you is, I'm from the movie business. So if you were selling me on the 30-second sort of Hollywood trailer of what it means to be a Democrat, why someone should vote for a Democrat today, what does it mean to be a Democrat?
Well, I want to just preface my answer by saying that I think that the messaging of the Democratic Party has been wrong. I mean, I really think lately, that the idea that we're like telling the story the way it should be told and then delivering on the things that we're talking about, like the National Democratic Party has not been getting this right. And it's very disappointing. So I really believe that to convince people to vote for you, you've got to deliver for them, right? And we Democrats have been talking about universal health care since Harry Truman.
Yep.
Do we have it? No.
Yep.
And yet we've had opportunities, but we haven't done it. And I'll go to something like the minimum wage. We've had the opportunity to raise the minimum wage. We had majorities in 2009 and 10. But we haven't raised the minimum wage since 2006 or 7. It's $7.25. It's now 2026, 20 years later. Still $7.25. You can't survive on if you have one full-time job, $14,000 a year. If you have two of those jobs, which means you have no time, but two, and you're exhausted, two of those jobs, $28,000, you can't raise a family on that. You could barely survive yourself. Yeah. So my point is that I think the message of the party and the delivery of what it is that we are about has been wrong. And we've got to repair that before we start, going out and saying, this is why you should vote for a Democrat. Now, I think there's an agenda that we should be talking about. That's me personally. I'm not speaking for the party, but I'm a Democrat.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned two of those things. Raise the minimum. We're putting more money in people's pockets is about affordability. You want to make things more affordable? How about put more money in my pocket? How about if we stand up for people's right to organize a union? How about if we stand up for people's ability to get prescription drugs at a reasonable price? Here in Illinois, we did that. We made, for $35 a month, you can, pay your insulin bill. We capped it $35 for people who were asthmatic, needed an inhaler, $25 a month. Those are things that really matter in people's lives. We have to deliver those things, we Democrats, right? And I remember campaigning for governor in 2017, 2018, going to areas of the state, as I do now, but for the first time sometimes. I had never been to some of the parts of southern Illinois and central Illinois. And, people had voted for Donald Trump just 2 years earlier. And why? Because for so many years they had voted for a Democrat or for somebody who said they were going to deliver something, and they never did. And here's a guy who's basically saying, I'm going to go blow it up, and I'm going to send you the proceeds of blowing it up. Yeah. People said, I don't know, I've never done that before. I'm going to try that. Right. Yeah. And I really think that we did our counter to that nationally, the party's counter to that wasn't very strong. And so that's one of the reasons why I think, and this is not a self-serving comment, but I'll just say that's one of the reasons that I think that governors and executives, people who've run a state, city, whatever, are best positioned in many ways to carry the mantle of the party. Because you know what? We don't get to just vote for things and then come back home and say, I didn't get it done, but I voted for it. Please send me back. We actually have to deliver something to people as governors. Yeah. And so I think that's something we Democrats need to take to heart.
I know we're just new friends, but I'm going to push back on you a little bit.
Okay. You could push back.
I want the 30-second trailer.
Okay.
I know, this world of politics, but the world of politics we live in is very strange, right? Because on the one hand, and I think this is a lot where Democrats get it wrong, right? Democrats are always about how they're going to fix the problem and the policies that are going to fix the problems. And Donald Trump in particular, I'm not even going to call Republicans, is extraordinary at just saying crazy things that he has no way of ever accomplishing, and usually lies about completely and doesn't mean anything he says. But it's such as you said, right? They're just these ideas. It's great, I like that idea, right? And in so many ways, not to compare Mamdani, that's what Mamdani was great about, right? It's we're gonna make the whole a la carte cheaper, and we're gonna make buses free, and we're gonna increase rent control. It's oh, that sounds great. Yeah. That sounds. Why should I be a Democrat? I have 30 seconds. Yeah, why should I be a Democrat?
You're right. I gave you longer sentences than I should have. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
We should put more money in your pocket. raise the minimum wage, right to organize. Everybody should have a doctor in this country. We Democrats are for that. By the way, the contrast is really important. They're not for that on the other side of the aisle. We're the ones who want to lower the cost of your pharmaceutical medications. They're raising those things. We're a party that wants comprehensive immigration reform where we've got a secure border and we've got immigration policy that allows us to bring people into this country because it's one of our great advantages. So those are 4 big issues that I think we Democrats ought to be running on. There are lots of other things. Creating opportunity for people to start a business. I think that's a fundamentally Democratic idea. That's like the little guy being able to get ahead. That's who we are.
Yeah, love that. I'm sold. I was a Democrat, but you got me more. I guess that's part of the question, right? The Republicans have been really good about this recently. They've been able to stay on message. They all say kind of some version of the same thing, which is comes down from from King Trump. Is it the message or is it the messengers? Like what is it in your mind?
Well, it's a combination of those things because you got to be able to deliver the message. But it matters who the messenger is. I think character matters. And I think more so than ever before, I think people are seeing that when the president of the United States has no character, when the person that holds the office has no moral core, and really doesn't believe much of what he says himself, and is a narcissist fundamentally, I think people want the opposite of that now. I mean, people really are looking for could you just tell me the truth? Could you just stand up and be a role model in some fashion for my kids, for our country? And so I think I think the messenger matters. But message, and you talked about some of those things, message matters too. What are you going to do for me? How are you going to deliver? And I think we're poised to rebuild the Democratic Party around that.
I heard you say a quote, something along the lines of the Democrats need to stop waging a conventional political fight and become street fighters. What did you mean by that?
What I meant was that, and of course the Republicans tried to misconstrue all that to make it something like physical violence. That's not at all. My point was that, Republicans have kind of thrown all the rules out the window and they're just doing whatever it is that they think will make them win. So they don't follow any rules. I'm just saying that we tend to be on the Democratic side such institutionalists that we're unwilling to contemplate that things maybe could be different and we could articulate ways to do that by changing the institutions. The things that Donald Trump's thrown out the window, even the DOGE, the cuts in so many things that I think have mattered, in previous years. When we think about what should we do in response to that, it's not rebuild the way it was. Some of it wasn't working. Some of it was. It was what people could figure out to do at the time. We're smarter now. We have more capability as a country. We have better technology, et cetera. We can do a better job and more efficiently to deliver healthcare, for example. And so I want us to be a party that's thinking now about rebuilding, but not what we had before, but along the ideals that we believe.
I know you're a big sports fan. Go Bears.
Yeah, go Bears.
I'm not gonna sit here talking about if the Bears are moving, which I know is the top of everybody's mind. We don't know the answer, correct?
That has not been decided yet.
All right. Well, I'm hoping for you guys. They do not move because that would be very sad. But I want to give you a task. You're the GM of Team Democrats right now, and it's the draft. And I want you to give me as I'm the owner of the team. I want you to give me a little scouting report on a couple of different people in your party right now. Mm-hmm. Something quick and short.
Okay.
All right. Because I am really excited about the Democratic bench that we have going on right now. I think we have some of the most exciting people that we've had in decades. And a lot of these people, and I'm curious. So, Westmore.
He's terrific. I mean, just a great person. We're good friends. And I think he's delivering for the people of Maryland. But, he's somebody who represents, I think, service to country. I think that's my shorthand on him.
Andy Bashir.
Andy is somebody who's overcome all the odds. I mean, in a state that's basically like deep red, here's a guy who won elections twice, against all the odds, and it's because I think character, and he's somebody that doesn't. He's not about tooting his own horn all the time. He's about what do I do to deliver for people, whether they're Republicans or Democrats.
Josh Shapiro.
He's also a friend. We got elected around the same time. I guess 2 years after I did, he was elected. 4 years. Sorry, 4 years after I was. Josh is a serious. He was Attorney General. He's a very serious public servant. I think he's a real player, and he represents a swing state that we Democrats need to win.
Governor Whitmer.
She also is a friend. We got elected exactly at the same time. In fact, we were at the White House together as governors-elect when Donald Trump invited the governors-elect, and we've been friends really ever since. We went through COVID together and have dealt with so many challenges. She's a unique, I think, a unique figure that has brought Michigan around from being a kind of a red-leaning, maybe pure red state to being purple and maybe even blue.
Right. I know you're not going to sit here and tell me if you're going to run for president because you're running for governor of Illinois. But one of the things that's interesting with the Democratic Party right now is that we don't really have, there isn't really a leader of the Democratic Party per se, in my opinion. It could be Ken Martin, right? I mean, it could be you, could be Gavin Newsom. Is that fair to say there isn't really sort of a standard bearer on the Democratic Party right now, and B, is there somebody that I'm not thinking of?
Well, whenever you don't have the presidency, there isn't a single person to focus on. It's not the chair of the party. It's not the majority leader of the Senate or the Speaker of the House or the minority leader of either house. And so, yeah, there's not a single person for sure. But, you said something earlier that's absolutely true, which is the bench, and I'll forget about presidential candidates for a second. The bench of leaders in the Democratic Party is really quite impressive. And again, people who have delivered. And so I think we're poised, again, to sort of, and again, we have to rebuild in the Democratic Party. So we're poised to get back on track and be better than we were before because we've got this great bench of leaders.
In theory, Donald Trump was going to be out of office in 2 years. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I don't believe he's running for a third term. Who do you see as being the sort of next in line Republican Party? I was having a conversation with Jim Vandehei from Axios. This was 2 years ago, and he said if Donald Trump stepped away today, it wouldn't be Marco Rubio, it wouldn't be J.D. Vance, it would be Tucker Carlson. Now, that was 2 years ago. Tucker's roles changed maybe a bit, but in your mind, the Republican Party, where do you see it going? Who do you see potentially being the leader of that party going forward?
Well, Donald Trump doesn't want any of them to be a leader. Let's start with that. So if you assume, as is true, that he's quite popular among Republicans, he really doesn't want anybody to sort of take his place as the leader. Because he wants to be the only one, right? That's his narcissism speaking. So if you assume that, think about the splintering that's happening within the Republican Party. What's happened to the podcast crew that all was behind Donald Trump? So now Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and others, right? The party is really quite fractured, and I don't think that they can coalesce around a single person. I really don't. I think that Marco Rubio is somebody who wasn't an original Trumper. He ran against Trump. He said terrible things about Trump. And then he sold out and became a Trumper. You've got J.D. Vance, who was like begging to be the vice president of the United States and doing anything. And he still has done anything to please dear leader. And so, these are just like two examples. And lots of people, think that in the Republican Party, they think that J.D. Vance is somebody who hasn't stood with Trump, let's say, on the Iran war or something else, although he's been there every time. And,
right.
But so there isn't a leader of the Republican Party, and I don't think there is easily somebody to identify. They're not going back. Let me be clear. I don't think they're going back to some day when, Bob Dole or Jack Kemp or, some, leader of the past or somebody who's like more rational is going to now be the standard bearer of the Republican Party. They can't do that anymore. And if they do, they're going to lose a bunch of people that they took out of people who had never voted before and became Trumpers. Yeah. They're all going to go away. I think they're in a real world of hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're seeing a big rift. And you have the Trump family, which who knows what their role is going to be. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. I want to switch to Israel, the Middle East. That's an issue that has divided the Democratic Party in ways that I haven't seen in decades, if ever. Is there, as a Democrat today, how do you think you can get elected with strong, ties to Israel and with this sort of unconditional support for Israel that we've had for decades?
Yeah, I don't think that somebody who's, standing up and saying Israel's doing it all right is somebody who should be elected, to be honest, because Israel isn't doing it right. And so, no. I also want to point out, you said it's dividing the Democratic Party. It's dividing the Republican Party, too. And so I will say that I think that the right position, the one that I think is where our nation should be going on this topic, is, look, if you believe, as I do, that Israel was created and was recognized by the United States in 1948, became an independent country, because there needed to be sanctuary, a safe, secure place for Jews in the Middle East and subsequently Jews from around the world. You also, if that's what our values are about protecting people, we should be standing up and helping to create a Palestinian state that is a safe and secure sanctuary for innocent Palestinians. Not for Hamas, not for Hezbollah. Those are terrorist organizations, but literally for the millions of innocent Palestinians who have never had their rights given to them or protected. It's time for them to have a state. And Israel should be, we, as the United States, we should be telling Israel, we want you and need you to be engaged in the creation of that Palestinian state. You have to be part of the humanitarian aid that gets provided to them, and that we will be, a guarantor of the creation of that state. And both of them need to be peaceful. So it's the only way you're going to get peace in the Middle East. It's the only way. So I think that's the right position. There are people who disagree with me. That's fine. I mean, that's just, I'm telling you what I think.
Right. You've, it's interesting, right? As a governor, you're not voting on policy that relates to, sending arms to Israel.
No, I joke about, there's no foreign policy as governor of Illinois other than whether you're going to build a wall to keep the Hoosiers out.
Right, exactly.
And I've got friends who are Hoosiers. I don't really want to keep them out, but.
Okay, that's nice of you. But obviously people, and this is what we talked about earlier, sort of, I think you're getting elected, mayor of, whether it's Los Angeles or Chicago or New York, and I want to hear your opinion on Israel. And it's, I don't know how we sort of got to that place, but that's where we are. Your Chicago local friend, Rahm Emanuel, was over in Israel recently giving a very provocative speech. He talked about this 23-state solution. Are there practical and tangible things that you think that the government should be doing now to actually sort of get towards that over in the Middle East and Israel?
Oh, sure. Well, the first thing that we ought to be doing is not sending, Witkoff and Jared Kushner to negotiate peace. These are the wrong people to do it. They have self-interest engaged in this. They're clearly not they can't bring Israel to the table. They're conflicted. So we've got to use our influence to make sure that we've got Israel at the table. By the way, we need peace with Iran. We have to end that war. They've been, decimated to a large degree. Yes, they've still got some drones and they're still able to do a few things. But the reality is that the purpose of going to war originally was said to be decimating their nuclear capability. I think that everybody understands that has happened. So here we are, though, paying the price for Donald Trump's really not understanding the Middle East. There's a reason why there was not war with Iran for 47 years, and why, this government in Iran stayed as it was for 47 years. There are reasons for that. The Strait of Hormuz, the challenge of Iran and the people of Iran, who mostly individually are pro-Western, but not the government there. So all I'm saying is that we do need to exercise both soft power and diplomatic mission to bring the parties together in order to make peace, not just about Iran, but also around the Palestinian state that we need to create.
Right. Yeah. One more question in Israel, and more specifically being a Jew in America today. I'm a Reformed Jew, bar mitzvahed. It's important to me, but it's not the only thing. But this post October 7th has I've seen a rift like I never knew and could have existed in the Jewish community, and I was a little bit unaware of. And at the same time, the anti-Semitism we've seen on the rise since then,
Yes,
been just horrific,
awful,
and devastating. As a Jewish man, how do you navigate those conversations that come up when people are, talking about Israel within genocide today, and when if you're at temple or if you're in the streets, like how do you you have a very measured approach on this, and seems very thoughtful, rational, and human rights oriented. But how do you have that conversation with two sort of extreme people who are Jewish or not Jewish?
You're talking about between Jews and anti-Semites, for example?
Or even specifically Jews, and who we now have Jews in our country who have extreme different beliefs on if Israel's committing genocide or not committing genocide, and it's split the Jewish people in many ways. How do you?
Well, I told you my views about the Middle East, and also I would just add to that one of the reasons that we're experiencing so much anti-Semitism in the world, well, first of all, it's been around for thousands of years, so it's there lurking somehow in the shadows for many years. But also because Netanyahu's been a disaster as a leader of Israel and as a representative of Jews, to the extent he could claim that, being the leader of Israel. Mm-hmm. He's been a disaster, and I think unfortunately, he was elected in Israel, and we value democracy in the world, and he was an elected leader. By the way, we elected Donald Trump, so countries make mistakes. Yeah. So one of the big challenges is how do we pull, having experienced what Netanyahu has done to cause a rise in anti-Semitism across the world, or at least to stoke the flames of it. I think my view is that there's nothing we can do about replacing Netanyahu. That's the people of Israel are going to make that decision. But we do have to react to what he has done. And I think that, again, I remember a time when, for many, many, many years, just being a Jew and having a state of Israel out there, when, you would see on television some disaster would occur in the world, in Asia, in Africa, someplace. And all nations would come together to try to provide, some relief, like the earthquake in Venezuela, for example, right? Nations would come together to try to provide, and there would be little Israel, little tiny Israel, with like 3 tents and 28 experts, right? And they would be there helping. There are no Jews that lived in the country that they're helping in. They're just there carrying out what I would say are the values of social justice that I grew up with being a Jew. And that, it seems to me, is lost right now, that Israel hasn't been doing those things. It's been doing what appear to be the opposite. And that is very disappointing. It's more than disappointing. I don't feel proud. I used to feel proud. I used to be able to, even with anti-Semites saying whatever they were saying, I used to say, there they are. right? That's that streak of belief in social justice is being carried out on an international scale by a little tiny country. And we're a little tiny demographic, by the way, Jews in the world.
Yeah.
And but there they were. And so I think that's, in many ways, I think that's how we recover is carrying out those beliefs about social justice on an international scale. And I think it's going to take a change in the government of Israel, but also it means that Jews around the world need to step up and try to express those values in a louder way.
Right. We've talked a handful about all of the awful things that Donald Trump has done. We need hours to go through the whole list. You just mentioned Iran. We talked a little about immigration, Doge, and cutting USAID.
Yeah.
Is there one thing at this moment that you think you could point to that is it's sort of the thing you feel like may leave the mark that's sort of the most challenging to kind of come back from when it comes to Donald Trump?
I mean, there are a lot of things, so we don't have enough time. But I'll tell you one that I really think about a lot, which is our relationships out in the world with our allies and also with countries that are not our allies, but not necessarily our enemies, have changed radically just in the years that Donald Trump has been president. And when I have asked people in Europe and in Asia, and some of them American expats, but others, how long do you think it will take for us to regain the trust of what used to be our most trusted allies, right? Of England, of Germany, of France, and Japan and so on, like just to regain their trust and restore the United States leadership role in the world. How long do you think? And I mean, the answers that I get, and these are not from, left-wing, whatever, haters or anything, but they say, the answers are somewhere between 20 years and never. That, to me, is enormously damaging. And the future of this country, of our economy, as well as our leadership in the world, we're a superpower. You can't be a superpower and all you do in the world is express yourself with your military.
Yeah.
And getting rid of USAID is getting rid of a whole bunch of tools that are good for the world. They're also soft power in a way because, we're bringing cures to diseases. We're helping people develop crops that they never could have grown on their own with USAID, and that's all gone. And so that's the damage to our reputation. Now what happens is people, when they need help in the world or when they're looking for an ally, they're going to some of our enemies, or at least our competitors, China.
Yeah.
And so that damage is going to take a long time to repair, and that is all Donald Trump.
Yeah, and as someone coming from Hollywood, soft power is, why America's been number one around the world for so many years, and, our business is decimated, the federal government has not been supportive, state governments have tried, but we're having a tough time, and we need to invest back in that business. But, I think it's interesting you get to USAID. I mean, that's the easy one, right? Because I think there was a $25-30 billion budget for USAID when it was cut. I mean, to think that they focused on that, something that would just ultimately all around the world help with saving lives.
And what did they do with the money? They gave it to people who don't need it.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Literally the tech bros, sitting behind him at his inauguration, and, people who are, the wealthiest people in the world, in the country, they're the ones who got the money that went to USAID, which was kind of,
I worry Iran winds up being the thing that is the worst of the worst, because right now that they can control the Strait of Hormuz, ultimately Iran's economy is going to be increased. So you built up to a place where it was irrelevant. Now it's going to have a stranglehold. That is very scary. And I don't know how he gets out of the mess that's created. You've said to Trump time and time again, immigration is one area that we talk a little bit about. Listen, the illegal immigration has been slowed by Donald Trump. It's very clear he went about it in a completely inhumane way that led to the loss of life of innocent people. What do you think, just as one thing, like what is the right immigration policy in America?
Secure borders and an immigration policy that allows us to bring people into this country vetted, but people of all types, with a variety of focus areas, right? We need farm workers, for example, but we also need scientists. And we want people to come to our schools in the United States and learn our ways and stay. And these are all things that over the years, we've been very good at, and now it's all decimated. But we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform. I'll give you an example of, I think, at least one way to do that, and that's there was a bill that passed in 2013 in the Senate. You may remember the Gang of Eight, was what the senators were called, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans who got together. Lindsey Graham was one of them, Dick Durbin was one of them, and so on. And they got together and put together a policy that passed the Senate with 68 votes. I mean, nothing passes the Senate, it was very little. 68 votes, and then the House wouldn't vote on it. And it never went anywhere. We have a blueprint. Does it need to have the dials turned a little bit here or there on that? Yes, we need to make some edits to it in amendments. But fundamentally, we have it right there. We need to be the party that's saying we need secure borders. I think that part of what Joe Biden did was just wrong. He took away a lot of the things that already existed. They existed under Obama. They existed under George W. Bush. They existed under Bill Clinton, and so on. And that was just a mistake, in my view. And by the way, Donald Trump made no changes to any of those policies, really, when he was in his first term.
Right.
So it's not like Donald Trump's some, hero of ending, the, people illegally crossing the border. I look back and I think there were a lot of mistakes that got made. And by the way, I was very public in my criticism of some of the things that Joe Biden was doing about immigration. Because you remember the migrants who were being sent to Chicago on buses by Greg Abbott. And these folks, these are folks who they had no jacket, they had no shoes, or they had sandals, and they were unprepared for a Chicago winter, and they were being put onto buses and sent here, and we had to react. No help from the federal government, really, almost no. And I said very publicly, here are some ways that we could change things to fix this problem. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. And I have a lot of respect for Joe Biden, just as a person who served this country honorably. But I think some mistakes were made.
You've done a lot of great things in the state of Illinois. We unfortunately don't have time to go over all of them. But I would love if you could sort of, as concisely as possible, talk about a couple of really interesting things that you've done. One thing in particular in relationship to social media. You just recently enacted a tax. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a fee on the social media companies. Remember, they're coming to, they're everywhere in the United States and around the world, but they take millions of people in the United States and their interactions on social media, and they monetize it for their benefit. But in the meantime, people's mental health is suffering as a result. Teenagers often, but lots of other people, and they've divided the country in many ways, and had a deleterious effect on education too as a result of what they're doing. So what I did was say, look, we don't get any benefit from these social media companies. They get all the benefit from the people of Illinois. Why can't they help pay for some of the damage that they're doing? If we can't stop them from damaging us, what if we could help have them pay for, for example, education, mental health care? And so I just asked them to pay a fee based on the number of users that they have, the different platforms, right? Whether it's Facebook or X or Instagram and so on. So that's been an important thing. I think, we also just passed the most secure AI bill. One that really focuses on protecting people from the most damaging things about AI and the algorithms that AI is built on. And with, for example, third-party audit of the algorithm, and also forcing the companies to have a plan for what happens if it all goes wrong. So it's not like they can't turn it off or deal with it. There's a real plan to do that. So there's a lot, those are just examples in the digital space, but there's a whole lot of things like, eliminating the grocery tax, like putting in place a child tax credit that puts as much as $600 back in people's pockets, and the earned income tax credit for the poorest of people who live in Illinois and putting some money in their pockets. I mean, those are all things that I believe in, and raising the minimum wage from $8.25 in Illinois to $15 an hour, which still isn't enough for people to live on, but it's a whole lot better than it used to be. So those are just examples, and again, my focus has been really centered around working families. What do they need? What are they suffering from? How do we alleviate their pain?
That was the handful of things you've gotten in there, which is great. And I think the people of Illinois are very lucky to have you. So I appreciate that. Before we finish up, I'd like to just do some fun stuff with you, go through a few questions, but more personal. Did you play any high school sports?
I did. I wasn't a particularly great athlete, but I was mostly playing intramural sports. I played soccer. I'm a tennis player. So those are a couple.
What was your thing in high school?
Well, I would say I was a football player before I went to high school, and wasn't good enough to be on any of the varsity or junior varsity for sure. But I do love football. I love watching it and I love playing it.
Got it. Okay. What was the first paying job you ever had?
It's a good question. Aside from like my parents giving me a couple of bucks for doing something, when I was legal to work, right, which was about 14, I went to my first job. My first job was working at a motel. It was our family's motel. And I remember vividly this job. First of all, it was a motel, one-story motel. My job was to go pick up the dirty sheets in each of the buildings, and then pile them up into a golf cart, take them to the laundry, and then load them into an enormous industrial laundry machine, and then move them to the dryer. That job, which was, dirty and hard and everything, I remember the very first day when I was heading out the door. Never done anything like that. I was going to get on the bus, go to my job. My mother said to me, "Now remember, you have to work twice as hard as the guy next to you because you didn't earn this job," and he did. And I will not forget that. And it's something, I talked about my mother and her character and what she believed in, but I will never forget that. I work really hard at the jobs that I have, and I recognize how privileged I am. And so that was my first job. And I did a couple of other jobs at motels, and I also worked at a hospital for a little bit. And so, yeah.
What did you want to be when you grew up at that time?
Gosh, I really, my father had passed away. So I kind of, at the time I thought, gosh, I want to, be my father. I want to do what my father did. It's like I want to go be an entrepreneur. I also, really love public service and the idea of it, and had met a bunch of elected officials because of my parents. So I think those things and by the way, I ended up doing both those things.
Yeah. What's one skill we might be most surprised that you have?
Oh boy, I guess I can sing.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I'm I'm no Bruce Springsteen or anything, but yeah, I can sing.
Do you have a favorite musician or band?
Well, Bruce Springsteen is one of them. My very, very favorite in the whole world is James Taylor. I grew up listening to James Taylor. My mother played it all the time, and then I just fell in love with it. I'll go to a James Taylor concert at a drop of a hat.
Final, just one word answer. Do you like to text or call?
Text. I prefer text.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just, I don't have time for
Got it.
calling.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Very early. Yeah. In fact, my staff hates it because I start texting them at 4:30 in the morning.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Do you sweet or savory?
Sweet.
Podcast or music?
Music. I do both, but music. Yeah. Every morning I walk on the lakefront or somewhere else in Chicago, and I've got my AirPods in, and I've got music on, but then I'll throw a podcast, usually a news podcast, on in the middle.
Right. Love it. Last thing. When this marathon is over for you, after your governor or your next chapter, whatever chapter that is, and you decide to step away from public life, what's the one thing you want to look back on and know that you fixed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll try to give you a brief answer, but Illinois was in a world of hurt when I took over. We had 21 credit downgrades in a row in this state for 25 years before we hadn't balanced the budget. We had $17 billion of unpaid bills when I took over. We've repaired a lot of that, and 10 credit upgrades, paid off all that debt and balanced the budget and so on. I think the fiscal health of the state, fixing the pension system, which used to be 39% funded, now it's 50% funded and headed in the right direction. That's a big deal. And I know that sounds really boring, but if you live in Illinois, you really saw things heading off a cliff. And so I feel very proud of having kind of pulled us back and turned us in the right direction. It's a big battleship that needed to be turned in the right direction. So that's one thing. And then I think the other is, I've tried to make sure that we're building an economy that will grow at a much higher rate than it has been. So an example of that is that, we've really become the quantum capital of the country here in Chicago. We built a quantum campus, University of Chicago, University of Illinois, our great institutions, Argonne National Laboratory, Fermilab, and so on. But this allows us the opportunity to maybe be the Silicon Valley of quantum. And I think it would be great, if 20 years from now, we could look at it and say it really has transformed our economy.
Great. Governor, thank you so much for your time. I
Thanks
can't
so
wait to
much,
come
Jim.
back and get a food tour.
I'm pretty good at the food tours, so looking forward to helping you with
I'll
that.
give you a food tour when you come to LA.
I love it.
Good luck with everything. You got a lot on your plate. Look forward to seeing you again in person.
Thanks, Jamie. Me too. Appreciate you.